Today, we're going to be looking at the scenario in which the United States and the EU go to war. Now, this video isn't supposed to be 100% realistic, so keep that in mind while you're watching. If you enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and let's get started. When comparing the economy and the military of both the EU and the US, they rank pretty closely. So this fight is going to be pretty close, but I'm also going to throw in some allies just to spice it up a little bit. Anyway, in some crazy alternative universe, the EU declares war on the USA. Now, of course, NATO isn't going to be a thing in this world because that would just turn it into a civil war. I have two more things just real quick. I'm going to split them up though. So the first thing is that this video was suggested by my Discord server. I held a poll over there where members of the Discord server could vote on which video they want to see next, and this video was chosen. So if you guys want to have map discussions, you can chat with me, you can talk to people who are interested in geography and history and maps and stuff like that, then there's a link to the Discord server in the description where you can join it. So we have every EU member state declaring war on the US. Now this war would most likely be an air and naval battle, since the two continents aren't really connected at all. But if I were to bring in some other country on the US's side over here, then it could be a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to be adding the UK on the US's side. After preparing their military, the British mainly focus on taking out Ireland, so they start taking over parts of Northern Ireland and move into Dublin pretty quickly. After some more fighting, they eventually gain ground and take over the entire island. Now this doesn't really set well with Scotland, who want to remain in the EU. Rebellions start taking place in the north, as Scotland is supplied by the EU. So this is what our map looks like. We have the US and England versus all of the EU. Now when I say England, I know I'm not including Wales and Northern Ireland, but that's because saying Wales, Northern Ireland, and England is kind of a hassle, where I could just say England and you guys would get the point. Back on the British Isles, England starts to push back into Scotland and takes Edinburgh. After the fall of their capital, Scotland quickly falls back to England. Taking a look at naval dominance, now I know this map is kind of blurry in some places, but the EU has naval dominance over the channel. Now, naval dominance as a whole looks something like this in Europe, so the EU obviously controls lots of the coastal water areas, while the British control all the British water areas. Now, since the US and the UK are both fighting a war against one power, Canada is going to join on the US and the UK's side. Now, the Canadian Prime Minister says that the main reason for joining the war is because the US was attacked. Now, there are many ways that this war could go. It really could go either way. Now, some countries would get involved, some countries wouldn't get involved, and it's really complicated to try to see how this war would play out. Personally, I think an invasion of the United States would be impossible, and I also think that an invasion of the EU would also be impossible. So it's really hard to simulate how this war would play out, like I said. But I'm going to go ahead and simulate a way in which the US wins, and then I might do a way in which the EU wins. They decide that the best way to take over Europe would be to land in Portugal, move up through Iberia, and create a front line along the mountains right here. After fighting for naval and air dominance for months, maybe even years, the US, UK, and Canada finally make a landing in Portugal. They land on the southern end and manage to set up base in southern Portugal. Their plan is to move up north and take Lisbon, and eventually start taking over Spain and eventually reaching Madrid. So, Team Blue starts their conquest and move up north toward Lisbon. Now, the Blue team doesn't need much military in Lisbon because most of the European countries have their military on their way to the Iberian Peninsula. So, the Blue team manages to take Lisbon, and Portugal starts to fall. Now, like I said in the beginning, this video isn't supposed to be 100% realistic because it's almost impossible to simulate wars like this. But the blue team manages to set up a front line along rivers here, so they have a river border up north here and a river border to their east. They start easily moving through the flatter areas of Iberia and go pretty swiftly, moving closer and closer to Madrid. The blue team eventually manages to kick out Portugal completely and start moving up into Galicia. Eventually, the blue team does reach Madrid. After the bloodiest battle of the war so far, they manage to take Madrid. Catalonia takes this time to rebel against Spain. Now, they're only rebelling against Spain, they're not rebelling against the EU, so they're only at war with Spain. The Catalonian rebellion pops up and is backed by the US, Canada, and the UK. Eventually, Spain starts to fall completely, and Iberia falls over to the blue side. Now the war is a stalemate, with both sides being at the mountain border between Spain and France. The blue side's next move is to take over Denmark and parts of Sweden. Basically, what they want to do is gain control to the Baltic Sea to stop any supplies that are being shipped up into Finland, Sweden, or the Baltic countries. So the UK sends over some boats to Copenhagen, and they take Copenhagen. After taking Copenhagen, they start their invasion of Denmark and do so pretty successfully. At this point, the EU army is all over the place and really disorganized, because now they have two fronts. They have one in Denmark and they have one in Iberia. Now, I just want to take a pause on this to talk about something real quick. This is something that just happened today, or something I just found out about today. So I've been feeling kind of sick the past week, and I went to the doctor. They tested me for strep, they tested me for the flu, and they tested me for COVID. Now the good news is that strep and the flu came back negative, but unfortunately the COVID did come back positive, and I'm currently COVID positive. So what does this mean? Well, it just means that I have COVID. So far, it really hasn't been horrible. I mean, it's been pretty bad. But it's kind of just like a cold on steroids. I'm not fully vaccinated. I'm half vaccinated. I was actually supposed to get my second dose tomorrow, but I have COVID, so I can't get it. But I just want to take this time to tell you guys that this does go to show that the COVID is not 100% over yet, and that we still need to be taking precautions that the CDC provides. It's also important to note that if you're fully vaccinated, it doesn't mean that you still can't get COVID. So I just wanted to put that out there. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So the UK is starting to get backed up by the blue side, and they start pushing back into Denmark. Eventually, they do meet the Germans at their border. Now the blue side starts an invasion of southwestern Sweden, and managed to take all of Sweden's coast. So at this point, this is what Europe looks like, and this is what naval dominance looks like. So we have a very divided map when it comes to the sea. We have the blue team taking over the waters around Iberia and a lot of the waters over here in Western Europe. They also have access to the Baltic Sea and the region up here. When it comes to the red team, we have the red team taking control of a majority of the Baltic Sea and almost all of the Mediterranean. France also still has naval supremacy along their coastline as well as the Benelux region. But other than that, the blue team is doing pretty good when it comes to naval supremacy. Back up north in Denmark, Germany starts to push back. They almost completely take the peninsula, but are stopped by the blue team's troops. And here we have ourselves the second stalemate. So the blue team is fighting a defensive over here in the, I guess, the Baltic entrance area, while the EU is playing defensive over here in the Spanish and French border. So both sides are going to have to come up with a plan in order to make the borders move. Eventually, the blue side does come up with a plan to take out Brittany and eventually invade all of France, while the EU makes a plan to take out Denmark and eventually get all of Sweden back. The first team to launch their plan is the EU, as they push into Denmark and manage to liberate almost all of Denmark. The blue team is almost completely kicked out of the Baltic area, as Denmark is completely liberated and a part of Sweden is still under blue control. A little after this happens, the blue team makes their landing in Brittany and managed to make a foothold in France. Now this is a pretty big deal for the EU because now they have a third front line. The EU starts rearranging their troops as the blue side starts to push into France. After fighting for a few months, France surrenders. That was just another funny France surrender joke. Anyway, the blue side does start to push into France pretty further and start getting close to Paris. Meanwhile, up north, the red team manages to push out the blue team from the Baltic Sea entrance. The blue team swiftly moves through France, fighting many battles against the EU. Eventually, they start getting closer and closer to Paris, and are at the gates of Paris. Meanwhile, down south, the blue team manages to make an encirclement of EU troops, and little by little starts to push them down into the mountains, and eventually they all surrender. While this is happening, the EU manages to push back a little bit, almost completely cutting off the blue troops down here. Up north, it isn't looking so good for the EU, as the blue team pushes into Paris and manages to take it. With this huge loss, the EU starts to retreat out of France and back into the borders of Belgium, Germany, and Italy. They use the mountains in southern France to their advantage, and manage to block off the blue team from taking all of France. Meanwhile, up north, the blue team starts to push closer and closer to Germany and Benelux. At this point, one of the EU's most powerful nations has been wiped out, with France not being in the war anymore. When it comes to Germany, Germany's military is mainly defensive, and they really aren't allowed to have that big of a military. And a lot of these smaller countries don't have that big of militaries. So from here on out, the blue team is probably going to be winning a lot more of their battles, and eventually are probably going to win the war. So the blue team starts to push up into Benelux, taking out Luxembourg pretty easily. They move through Belgium, and eventually are stopped in the Netherlands. They move through the French-German border, and start taking over southern Germany. Meanwhile, down here in France, some of the EU's troops are pushing out of the mountains and back into France. Up north, the blue team continues to push through Benelux and Germany, and now have conquered all of Western Germany. The blue team starts their approach toward Berlin. Up north, the British once again take over Copenhagen, and start taking over Denmark and parts of Sweden. From here, the red team has to make a plan in order to get back on their feet. The red team's main plan is to let France and Germany fall, and establish a front line up here against Poland and Czechia. Basically, if you don't know, there's a huge mountain border right here, and there's also a huge mountain border right here. So if the red team could use this mountain to their advantage, they would only have to station troops along here. So they do just that. They retreat and fall back to the mountains as the blue team starts pushing in on all sides. They quickly take over Denmark and capture Berlin, and eventually meet the Polish and EU troops at the Polish-German border. So this is what we currently have right here, and this is the fourth and final stalemate of the war. The red team does manage to push the UK out of Sweden again, and even managed to push the blue team all the way out of Austria. But for the most part, this is where the war is stopped, and like I said, it's kind of hard to simulate these kind of wars because something like this would probably never happen. Also, the US and the EU are both very similar in strength, so I don't think that this would be able to happen. I think that the blue team is a little overpowered here. But this is just one scenario I'm doing. Now, there could be a scenario in which the EU wins. For example, they could probably take out the British Isles, and maybe they would move over into Canada and start taking parts of Canada. Maybe some of the US's islands down here in the Caribbean. Anyway, the blue team starts to push back the front line and pushes through Poland. The Battle of Warsaw happens with a fierce Polish resistance, and the red team manages to win the battle. Eventually, the Polish start to push back the blue team. So at this point, this is what the borders look like. We have Western Europe being under blue control, and a lot of Northern, Eastern, and Southern Europe under red control. At this point, though, I'm pretty sure the war would almost end, as the blue team starts to push back into Poland and take over Warsaw. They start moving down into Czechia and Slovakia, and eventually start taking over Hungary and capture Budapest. It is here that the EU surrenders to the US, Canada, and the UK. This is just one outcome where the US manages to take over Europe. And here is the peace treaty. So we have the UK taking over all of Ireland. Just don't do what you did. We have the US occupying Portugal. Now, this is mostly just because they want to have a foothold in Europe, just to make sure that everything over here is going well. We have Catalonian independence over here in Spain and France. Now, this is based off the war scenario, not real life. And we have a blue team occupied zone up here in France, with them taking over Brittany. So, do I think that this war would happen? No, I don't think this is anywhere near realistic. But like I've said in many other videos, sometimes it's fun to look at what could happen. I forgot to point this out, but real quick, Benelux is all united because this region was pretty decimated when the blue team moved through it. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. By doing that, you're telling me that you're enjoying these kind of videos and I should put more of them out there. If you guys have any kind of suggestions for me, leave them in the comments. Like I said, this video was suggested by my Discord server, so if you guys want to be able to vote on videos and stuff like that, there's a link for it in the description. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.